Who you are is not a byproduct of your history, but rather is based on the commitment of a future that you're inspired by, that is in spite of the things you've been through, right? As a very simple analogy, I say the wake of a speedboat doesn't dictate its direction, right? And if you really get that, that's how most people live their lives, as though the wake, that which is behind them, is somehow influencing and actually defining their choices in life, which is very human because the brain, designed to predict and protect, all it has is the archive of your history to pull from to make choices. But again, one of my quotes, as you may have heard, I say, past hurt informs future fear. Mm-hmm. So what happens is wherever we've had trials and tribulations, where we have suffered, then yes, it makes sense that the brain, which is just wanting to make you survive, is going to go, well, don't do that again because that sucked. Try and do this, which is usually a reaction to what you don't want, all of which means you're just constantly reliving your history. And then people wonder why they attract the same person. They go from one job to the next, but it's really the same mechanics that are at play, even though it's a different building and a different industry. Mm-hmm. They're still feeling their sense of value is not being met in the marketplace because you haven't changed in terms of your view. And that's okay. It's not a judgment. There's all love and compassion. But let's get beyond those constraints and step into your true essence, which is boundless, timeless, and pure potentiality.
So welcome, Peter Crone, the mind architect, onto Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. I am beyond honored to have this conversation with you today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, my dear. I really appreciate it.
Peter, I really want to acknowledge you most importantly because I was so fortunate to recently witness your magic in the room in a workshop at the Biohacking Conference in Dallas. And I got to witness you transform the room and really change their perspective on life and how they are showing up in their relationships and in their life, and why that is creating either the circumstances in their life or playing a part in their own misery. And so I would really like to unravel that most importantly, because I believe, so my first question, I believe perspective is everything. And once you shift into a different perspective, it will literally change your thoughts, your emotion, and your actions and reactions to life. Yeah. So I'd love to just ask you, how could we shift our perspective and move into a different way we look at things so that we could live into a different outcome in our life?
Sure. Well, firstly, it was a pleasure to meet you in person, and that was such a powerful afternoon with all of those people, and especially when I got to work with that one woman and her relationship to her daughter. And there's something about being live with people that just sort of lights me up, and it's just so fun to be able to see people, hug people, and so I'm glad you were part of that. With regards to perspective, yes, perspective being reality. We all think by virtue of the human design that we are, that everything that is impacting us, whether it's good or bad, is outside of us. And I would have said, actually, it's not what's out there so much as how we relate to it. And so we could say that's perspective. And based on the way the world looks to us, we are going to act commensurate with that. So if you have a view of somebody, your in-law, your spouse, your brother, your dad, your kids, then you communicate in a way that is in keeping with that particular perspective. So when people start to see that, they don't really right now have it, most people, that, oh, it's my view of my dad. It's for them, it's no, that's how my dad is, right? But if I were to talk to his best buddy or his neighbor or his friend at work, they'd be like, well, no, Dave's like this. Like, so you start to see, oh, hang on a minute, I relate to life in a way that is in keeping with my view, my perspective, and hence that drives my thoughts, feelings, actions, and outcomes. So in order to change perspective, you first have to be aware of the fact that you have one. Right? Because for most people, it doesn't occur as a perception, it occurs as the way life is. So that's the first step, is realize, oh, I'm a walking view. As I tell people, you're a walking conversation.
Mm.
And when you can see that, you can start to cherry pick parts of the conversation. Some of the conversation you have is great, that you love certain things, you enjoy your work, you are passionate about your vocation or your spouse or your kids. That's great. But we want to be able to dissolve the parts of your perspective that perhaps don't work or leave you in a state of stress, anxiety, depression, disease, or whatever it might be. So that's the first step, is seeing that you're a walking perspective and that some of your perspective kind of sucks.
True that. Yeah. So then one of the, you speak in quotes, and I know you dropped a lot of quotes in this workshop, and you do in all the talks you have and share on social media as well. And there's one that really spoke volumes to me, and it just landed differently of how you delivered this. And it's one of your most popular quotes, and that life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you are not free. Can you
Yeah,
explain this more deeply?
for sure. And this could take the remainder of the podcast, so I hope you're sitting comfortably. um, yeah, so really for me, when that quote came through me, it was my understanding of recognizing what is the real game afoot to be a human, right? Most people are playing the very linear track version of being a human. You start when you're young, you go to kindergarten, you go to elementary school, whatever you do, you go through the education system, you graduate, maybe you go to college, you get a job, eventually you fall in love, you start a family, you go from a 1-bedroom apartment to a 2-bedroom apartment to maybe a little house, maybe a house in the suburbs, and you hope that things will progressively improve, right? That's the track. But the way I look at life has got nothing to do with that. What I talk about is this vertical ascension, which is more to do with the frequency that we are as a human being, which is why we're here, as far as I'm concerned, which is to break free from the constraints with which we arrive. Now, what does that mean in lay terms? Everybody's stuck in prisons of their subconscious, right? That I'm not good enough, I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, I'm a loser, I'm a failure. And then that is the precursor to manifesting all of the trials, tribulations, and problems that people have. So life presenting you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free is the real game of being a human in form, but really that is the interface for us as spiritual beings to evolve and ultimately to find what I think everyone's looking for, which is freedom, to be free from the shackles of our own suffering. And so that's what that quote speaks to, is that whatever you do, wherever you go, life is going to present you with the opportunity through people and circumstance to show you where you're limited, aka not free. Now, the sad part is that the way most people react to that is, because we're designed to avoid pain and seek pleasure, is that whenever we get confronted, or nowadays everyone talks about being triggered,
Right.
that is where you're not free, that most people seek some form of escape from that, whether it be in a substance, food, sex, TV. They want to get away from suffering versus recognizing, no, that's life sort of giving you a nudge, hopefully to begin with gently. Later in life, it becomes a little bit more severe or dramatic, usually, because you didn't pay attention to the early signs. And so it's like, hey, you're here to get out of the view that you are not loved, or whatever their version is. And you keep manifesting circumstances to show that until you get the lesson, realize it's a lie. Once you step out of that, that's the perspective shift. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm stepping literally into a different world. So that's the quote. And for me, that is the raison d'etre for being human. It is our purpose to be here and to break free from the unconscious prisons that create everybody's suffering.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, as they say, like, as you mentioned, the triggers, we all have triggers, and it usually stems from something of our past. And so that we
Mm-hmm.
develop a defense mechanism to avoid that pain. And yet we tend to react or be triggered, and we react to that pain. So how could people really become more conscious of their reactions and kind of stop them from reacting to those triggers that we all have?
I think, first of all, by understanding what I just said, right, which is that it seems from a survival perspective smart to not engage, to avoid. Like if there's someone in your family that you haven't spoken to for years because they don't like you, they upset you, whatever it is, there's an avoidant energy, then we tend to cut out things like that's sort of very much the allopathic approach to the body, right? Oh, you got bad something, we'll cut it out, as opposed to, well, let's look at why is that particular organ or that tissue malfunctioning or not working or in a state of disease. So it's really by paying attention to, where are you in lay terms getting upset? Who pisses you off? What situations are you trying to avoid? These are the treasures. Of course, that's a complete reframe for most people. For most people, no, that's something that I do not want to face. Okay, great. But in not facing it, you're not actually going anywhere. You're just holding on to the energy that doesn't allow you to see what an extraordinarily big human being you are. Apparently, Zoom agreed with that point too. and to be able to transcend that, to become big enough to be able to hold space for whoever or whatever is out there without being upset. That's the power that is available to us on the other side of feeling that we are victims of circumstance. And that's where, I make a very clear distinction between you're either a victim of life or you're fully responsible. It's an on-off switch. There's no gradient, right? And most people do not want to have full responsibility for their existence. Much easier to point fingers at mom, dad, boss, spouse, kids, whoever.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with that statement more, because I believe my whole trajectory of my life changed once I took full responsibility for the chaos I was a part of and creating as well myself. And I think that's the hard thing, but I also think it's the most empowering thing to do is when you step into full responsibility. But it could be overwhelming, and because people don't want to be blamed for, per se, their part they play in their own madness. And so stepping into full responsibility, as you said, it's either victim or full responsibility. As you kind of walk through in the workshop, you were, it's hard to bring up this whole conversation, but you were talking to a woman and the problems she was having with her daughter, and her daughter, using drugs and, kind of self-destructive patterns. And then she was blaming the mom for the outcome of now who she is, if you want to say. And you spoke to the woman that she is responsible for that as well. And how does that kind of that conversation, if you could kind of explain that to the listeners about stepping into full responsibility and how that is empowering opposed to disempowering you and changing then the trajectory of your life.
For sure. So with her in particular, we could all in the room, and hopefully anyone listening could certainly sympathize and have compassion for a mother whose daughter is, slowly killing herself through substances and addiction. But then also the real guilt and shame that the daughter was putting on the mum as though it's her fault, right? And if you recall, whilst I helped her navigate that, which is very sensitive, and it's a real life situation that happens in millions of families around the world, the responsibility that I wanted her to have was less for the behaviors of her daughter and more for the lens she was looking through, her perspective, right? And what I did is I took her back to her childhood and saw where, quote unquote, in this case, her dad had said certain things to her that made her feel, again, like it's her fault, right? And this is what I speak about, these 10 prisons that I do my work in, my masterminds with people, and that's what I'm writing about, is that one of the prisons in this case was her belief that it's her fault, which really sits inside of she did something wrong, right? Now, for her, she recognized, and it brought up a lot of emotion, right? That she did something wrong as a kid because her dad said X, Y, and Z. It's like, oh, you were a bad child. So that's the continuation, the perpetuation of that lens she was looking through as a kid. And now all that's happened is the circumstances have changed, but the way she's relating to them is the same.
Right.
That she's a bad person and she'd done something wrong. But had she done something wrong? No. Her daughter was struggling. That's not something to be, dismissed or to be disrespectful of. But there's a very different energy when you're looking through the lens of self-guilt and shame, where you actually become powerless now because you're at fault. You feel like a victim. You don't have any kind of domain over that scenario, versus going, oh, I can see that my daughter's struggling with whatever she's struggling with. I love her. I care about her. I'm going to do everything I can to support her, but also understand that's her karma, her trajectory for whatever reasons, whatever she believes. But it's got nothing to do with I'm bad or I did something wrong. That's the disservice. That's the disempowering lens. So when she saw that, it completely changed her relationship to herself and consequently her daughter, where she's not a victim of her daughter's frustrations. She can take her part in being the mother of that child. But now the daughter is an adult. She's making her own choices. And we can only, to whatever degree that human being is available for support or love or help, contribute. If the daughter just wants to sabotage her life, as many people do because their ego wants to be right, in her case, something about she's a loser, she's not loved, she's not wanted. Well, now she's proving it, right? Which is the insanity of the ego, is that we'd rather be right about our inadequacies, insecurities, than actually have a life of happiness and freedom. And when people see that, it's bonkers, right? So that was the unpack for her, is that really her daughter was the life, person, circumstance revealing to her where she's not free, which is the guilt and shame that she had had for decades before her daughter was even born.
Right, right. And so that's the thing, is we really create our own prison
Yep.
very often, and we self-sabotage the very thing we want.
Mm-hmm.
So how could we then, first of all, why do we do this? Is it just because of how we were brought up and the pattern that just carried over into all stages of our life? But how could we move from then limited and imprisoned to free and expanded?
So again, so yes, we do create them, but it's a much more esoteric / philosophical conversation, which I assert that we all arrive with these constraints. This dimension of being human on planet Earth is the cauldron, the catalyst within which we get to reconcile, transcend these constraints, right? So that's the why. Everybody has them. And I've delineated, as I said, these 10 primal prisons that every human's got. Some we outgrow just through maturity, trials and tribulations that we eventually mature through, and others define us, right? So for her, in that particular case, the one defining her was still very strong, which is she did something wrong. And that's the guilt and shame. And everyone can relate to that. Because as kids, we're told, right? So to, first of all, see that that's why we're here. That's the purpose of being human, as far as I'm concerned. The second part of how do we move from that prison and limitation to being, sort of unbound, free, and expansive is through awareness. You have to recognize, oh, that's who I am in the view of myself, right? That my ego, my identity, my persona is the very constraint that I'm up against. It's not life isn't difficult. It's not that my husband is a pain in the ass. It's not that my mom or my mother-in-law is someone I can't stand who thinks that I'm a horrible human. It's where I'm stuck in my own limited view of myself, not recognizing the divine, boundless, timeless being that I am, the soul, the spirit. And so it's really making a shift from am I misidentified with my human identity and ego, or am I becoming more and more aligned with the being and the soul that is my true essence? And so that's the shift. So wherever we feel upset, limited, anxious, depressed, angry, whatever it is that we might feel where we are at the effect of life, something is bothering us, then we are absolutely in our identity. There's no such thing, I tell people, as a person with a problem. Doesn't exist. The person and the problem are synonymous. So whatever anyone's dealing with right now, it's not that you are dealing with that. It's that whatever you're dealing with is an extension of the you that you currently think you are. And when you see that, it's so powerful. It's because of the way you relate to things. Like Wayne Dyer said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, right? So what I'm in the business of, which may sound a little culty, is like I'm killing people, their identities that no longer serve them, so they can step into a new iteration of themselves, which is far more expanded and far more free and based in the energy of love and possibility.
Ooh, so good. I speak about this a lot, of how powerful the force of our identity is. And we have sometimes a vision of who we want to be, but there's this void in between.
Yeah.
And that's what you're kind of talking about, is like, how could we shift into this new identity, that person you wish to become, that you have the potential of being, is you need to somewhat die off the version you've always been.
100%.
And it's not, and it's not exactly about, because a lot of people will be like, oh, I need to add this in, I need to do this new action to achieve this result. But sometimes it's unlearning all of the things, as you mentioned, that aren't serving us, that are stopping us, and that there's that void. So I love, because awareness is always the foundation of any change. There's step one.
Yeah.
But then what do we do with that awareness? How do we, close that void?
Great question. And yeah, so I sort of talk about these two main buckets with my work. The first step is awareness, meaning to be aware of the fact that we as humans are looking through a lens of constraint, through no fault of our own. There's no guilt or shame. And these are usually big blind spots, right? It's like, oh, wow, I've lived through the lens of not being good enough for 30, 40 years. And it's caused my people pleasing, my perfectionism, my over efforting that creates stress and disease. And this is now why I have Hashimoto's or whatever anyone's dealing with. So we can have compassion for ourselves and forgiveness. But so awareness is the first step to go, wow, I truly have been misidentified with this narrative about myself around not being good enough, not being loved, not being safe, which is a big one for women, or whatever it is. And that creates my anxiety and my stress and my sleeplessness and my indigestion and my Crohn's and blah, 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 all of the things. Then the second bucket is practice. Right. So through investigating, I say investigating the validity of this prison, meaning, is it an actual truth? Right. And I can help people cut to the chase. No, it never is. So whatever you're dealing with, whatever you think about yourself that has you feel somehow inadequate, insecure, or feeling a sense of scarcity around your material life, it's not a truth. It's a conversation. And it can be very painful, and it can lead to all sorts of, struggles and really tragic experiences. So that's why I have compassion. But when you realize it's not a truth, then I ask the question, who could you be in the absence of that constraint? Now we start to tap into discernment and intelligence. It's like, oh my God, first thing most people say is I'd feel so free. I'd feel so light. That's why my main product is freedom. Yes, because I'm helping you break out of the constraints that most people are oblivious to. And that's why my catchphrase is I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. Right? That's the dissolution of the person that is actually currently holding you back from the potential that you are. And if people really understand that, it's super powerful, right? That you're not this persona walking around with the litany of trials and tribulations and failures from your history, with parents that weren't there, or mother that never adored you, or a father that was always at work, or boyfriends and girlfriends that dumped you, or whatever it is that you think is your history that justifies you feeling sorry for yourself. All that's doing is propagating and reinforcing whatever story you have of yourself based in inadequacy. Because the ego's primordial imperative is to be right. Right. And if you really understand that, one of my quotes, I say, being right is the poor man's version of self-worth. Because you start to go, holy shit, like what I say I want is a passionate relationship. I want to have an exquisite body that is full of radiance and vitality. I want to make shit tons of cash. I want to make a difference in the world. Like, who wouldn't sort of sign up for that kind of life? And if you don't have that, then what you're actually up to, what you're really up to, is you're being right about some form of limitation about yourself, which is okay. You're human. We have compassion. But let's stop playing that game, because that's really unfulfilling. So that's the dissolution process. So when you see through awareness, step one, the lies you're living in, then we investigate who could I be in the absence of that. It's as blatant as asking someone who's in a prison somewhere, like literally incarcerated. The awareness is you're in prison. Yeah, okay, you can go into meditation, shut your eyes and imagine all sorts of stuff. You could do ayahuasca in your cell and see the God and the unity of everything. But when you wake up and you come back to life, you're still in prison, right? This is the one issue I have when people go on these ceremonies and trips and they get these exquisite, powerful insights about the real nature of life. And it's beautiful. But if they don't deal with the subconscious constraints, then they're still imprisoned, right? So then we say, okay, well, if I open the door of that prison and you step out, what becomes available? Well, shit, I can do anything. Okay, that's a good start. I'd feel free. I'd feel happy. I'd feel joyous. My body would feel more vital. I could meet someone. I could express the love that is truly in my heart. Great. So let's practice living that way. So that's the second part. And that takes a little bit of time, just as if someone went for a tennis lesson or a golf lesson. They get powerful insights, hopefully from a good coach, but then they have to go and practice this new discovery. And so it's the same with the subconscious and stepping out of the prisons that most people are oblivious to. It takes time to live as literally a different human being.
Absolutely. Really, I speak about this as well. Like, there's so many people that have these health goals, or they want to lose weight at the new year, and they'll start this workout program, this new diet or whatnot. They'll do it. They always, I think it's like 90% of the people always return back to the same weight. And this is where the new identity really has to happen, because you're becoming a new person. So you're going to have to be in alignment with that person you want to become. Like, how do
Yeah.
you think? What actions do you take? Like, what does that person do? And you need to become that new identity. So a lot of this work is what you're sharing today, which everybody, you should rewind the last 3 minutes and just listen to it again. And now we're going to get in the second half of the interview because let's go a little deeper.
Sure.
So I think there was one thing you mentioned that I thought was really powerful is we were at a biohacking conference. And so people there are all about optimizing their health. Like, what could I do?
Yeah.
What's the new thing that could help improve this
Yeah.
part of my health? And you stated to really access true health, you need to free your mind. And so what you're talking about and why
Yeah.
you are called the mind architect is really freeing that thing that's holding you back from everything you desire in your life, whether
Yeah.
it be optimal health.
Yeah.
So moving into kind of one of the steps that I love to talk about, and really I believe the pathway of self-love is forgiveness and acceptance.
Yeah.
Acceptance of this has been my path that has led me where I am today and who I am today. A
Yeah.
lot of people, when I asked this question in a room, I was speaking at a mastermind, I said, like, I think a lot of the people in the room felt that they loved themselves. They felt that they've arrived at that point where they accept themselves. But then when I asked the question, like, do you accept everything that has brought you here? Have you made peace with it? The
Hmm.
pain, the failures, and whatnot. And there was a lot of people that rose their hand that said, no, they didn't. And I think that's the missing piece. So, how do we come to full acceptance of every circumstance that has led us to where we are today? And so that we can move forward in forgiveness, especially for ourselves, for what we have played the part in that
Yeah.
experience.
It's a great question, and it's definitely a challenge because, as I said earlier, the reason people don't accept their history is because they get a payoff in terms of sustaining their ego, right? Because but this happened to me, or I did this. The only reason, the only rationale for not integrating that as part of your history is because it still keeps alive a part of you as an idea, as a persona that is based in limitation, guilt, shame, and inadequacy. So that's the first thing to see is, wow, the only way I can actually sustain the ego that I have become misidentified with is by having evidence for it.
Mm.
And the only place I can find evidence is in my history. So when people really see that, it's an ouch, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just being right about a history that I'm judging in order to sustain the facade of who I'm not, which is actually in conflict with the life that I say I want. Now, if you just unpack what I said there, there's so much there for people to digest, right? So it's less about accepting and forgiving our history, and it's more about being committed to actually transcending the false identity that I've become addicted to.
Mm.
And that's why it's hard, because there's no greater addiction, as far as I'm concerned, than somebody's own persona. That is the ultimate form of death, right? That's why, albeit tongue in cheek, that's what I do, is I quote unquote help people die off to the idea of themselves that is actually suffocating the potential of who they are as a boundless being. And when you can really feel that as a human, you become way more committed to accessing true potentiality, true joy, true freedom, true love, true possibility, and vitality. Then you become, and you become less interested in maintaining the cage that locks all of that down. And
Mm.
so that's, where, as you said at the beginning about listening to what I shared, as much as it might be for some of those biohackers confronting, because they're literally dropping tens, twenties of thousands of dollars on the latest equipment because with all the best intentions in the world, they want to become the best version of themselves. And here's this dude at the front of the room saying, hey, you ain't going to access true vitality unless you free your mind. I don't care how many hyperbaric chambers you've got and whatever cryo freaking things you've got. They're awesome. And I'm a stand for taking care of my meat suit. I take very good care of my vehicle. But I also know that I work with these people who've got more money than time, billionaires to millionaires, greatest athletes in the world. They've got all the toys. but they still struggle with anxiety. They still feel hopeless. They sometimes have suicidal ideation. They don't like their wife. They can't get along with their ex. They hate their parents. Their kids misbehave, all the things, right?
Right.
And I promise you that is an extension of the prison that they're stuck within, that they become misidentified with. And through no fault of their own, they sustain by holding on to things in their history to justify that perspective. And so that's what I'm doing, is cleaning all of that up and realizing that who you are is not a byproduct of your history, but rather is based on the commitment of a future that you're inspired by, that is in spite of the things you've been through, right? As a very simple analogy, I say the wake of a speedboat doesn't dictate its direction, right? And if you really get that, that's how most people live their lives, as though the wake, that which is behind them, is somehow influencing and actually defining their choices in life, which is very human, because the brain, designed to predict and protect, all it has is the archive of your history to pull from to make choices. But again, one of my quotes, as you may have heard, I say, past hurt informs future fear.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is, wherever we've had trials and tribulations, where we have suffered, then yes, it makes sense that the brain, which is just wanting to make you survive, is going to go, well, don't do that again because that sucked. Try and do this, which is usually a reaction to what you don't want, all of which means you're just constantly reliving your history. And then people wonder why they attract the same person. They go from one job to the next, but it's really the same mechanics that are at play, even though it's a different building and a different industry. Mm-hmm. They're still feeling their sense of value is not being met in the marketplace, because you haven't changed in terms of your view. And that's okay. It's not a judgment. There's all love and compassion. But let's get beyond those constraints and step into your true essence, which is boundless, timeless, and pure potentiality.
So beautifully said. You speak so much life into me, and I'm sure everybody listening. It's amazing. You spoke about how we tend to, if we don't shift, if we don't change what's going on up here. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously I'm pointing to my head because that's where a lot of the trouble happens, as the mind architect knows.
Yeah.
And so we will, especially when it comes to relationships, I believe relationships are some of the biggest triggers, because they confront a lot of parts of us that we have yet to heal or address, if you want to say, and we're responding from past hurt, as you mentioned. Yeah. And so in relationships, I'm sure a lot of people that have struggled in relationships, me being one, luckily I've healed those parts myself because I took responsibility for the part I was playing in my madness. Yeah. So we tend to go into the same relationship, a different package, same package, a different bow. And that's how our relationships, as like you said, another job, same package, different bow, and we get the same result. So I think it really comes down to this work on ourselves. Like, we need to really face that pain. And so would you say that, all of us want to avoid the hurt? That's what our ego is meant to do. But do you feel we actually need to face that pain so that we could transcend and move into a new reality?
Yes, if the commitment that people have is to be free, then yes, that is the step. And I would just soften the word need. We don't need to, but that is the choice that we make if we're committed to truly waking up to the essence of who we are, right? So it just takes away the pressure. It's just also being compassionate towards ourselves as human beings, that we are designed. It's part of our hardware to try and survive and make it in life, which means that the brain, as I said earlier, which is always trying to predict what might happen that previously hurt us, right? The guy that comes home late from the golf course, who's had a couple of beers, who's already in a state of fight or flight because he's upset that his girlfriend, his wife, is going to be mad because he's late and dinner's cold, or, whatever very benign, mundane, everyday existences that humans go through every day, is still the opportunity to see where someone's not being responsible, or they're already manifesting their own suffering ahead of anything that's even happened, right? So when you start to see that, I can remember one of my golfers who I worked with, and he started within the first few weeks to just play extraordinarily well, because he was stepping into freedom, not from past hurt, past disappointments, past miscuts and failures. He was just stepping into truly what the future is, which is open, a blank canvas for anything. And he sent me a text and he said, holy shit, I just got it. He said, it comes down to whoever's got the best imagination.
Mm.
right? And when you really see that, that's why children are so full of joy, because to them, they are going to be a train driver. They are going to be an astronaut. They might even be the president, whatever it is. It's not that they're going to do that, but they're living in a space of creativity.
Mm.
And creativity has got an undercurrent of joy and purpose and fulfillment associated with it. What most people don't know is that, I would assert, it's a bold statement, I've yet to meet anyone who isn't reactive. Now, that doesn't mean there can be the extremes of like someone's like, fuck you, blah, 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 and there's a real big reaction. Even a guy who's trying to like swipe at someone who's looking at his girlfriend in a bar and it pisses him off because of his insecurities or whatever, right? But just subtle reactions of, whatever it is that somebody says, to the guy that cut them off in traffic, and it's like, well, screw you, and they're flipping them bird. Or even the person who's trying to be spiritual, who's feeling that, but is like waving and trying to be cocky, it's still whatever. It's still a reaction, right? And so when you start to see that we as human beings, because of this lens that we look through, which is based in survival, no fault of anybody, everything is a reaction, because everything outside of us is perceived as where the threat comes from, not realizing, no, that's just life. The threat comes from your perspective. It comes from your own interpretation of life. And when you're able to see that, you start to become way more responsible and powerful and realizing, holy shit, my internal terrain of anxiety, depression, stress, suffering, anger, dis-ease, right? The absence of ease is all of my own creation. That's bonkers. I really thought it was because my dad's an asshole. I really thought it's because my boss is a dick. I really thought it's because my wife is a bitch. Whatever it is. No, it's all us with us. That's the good news. That's when you really start to become responsible and go, oh, okay, I have beneath the surface of my constraints, on the other side of these subconscious prisons that I'm now starting to become aware of, there is an entirely new world of pure potentiality for me to access when I stop being right about why I can't live an extraordinary life.
Ooh, so powerful. And basically what you're stating is all we need is within us.
Yeah.
Everything we seek externally is already within us. And it's a bold statement, but it's really, really true when we tap into that. And I love that you bring up how children are so creative and that's why they live in joy. That's really a beautiful thing to recognize. Like, how are we not living in joy and how could we strive for joy every day? And one of the other things, a part of freedom, I believe, is having inner peace.
Yes.
I kind of believe they're synergistic. So
absolutely.
What are ways that this is really fascinating to me, and I actually want to ask you this first before I guess we could, okay, I should probably continue my question, but I want to ask this afterwards. How do you practice creating inner peace in your everyday? Or, what could we take away from your practices or that you teach your clients that you work with in your mastermind or whatnot, how we could tap into inner peace in our everyday?
Beautiful question. So I think the first step is to recognize what I'm talking about is part of the human journey, right? That everybody, however mature, however wealthy, however famous, however good looking, however much work they've done, everybody's got by default these constraints that are typically hidden deep in the recesses of our subconscious, so they're hard to access. So that breeds compassion both for ourselves and those around us, because it's very easy to point fingers at people as, well, they shouldn't smoke or they shouldn't be a dick. And it's like, well, if you knew what they were dealing with in the way that they view life, you would understand their choices, right? It doesn't condone behavior, but it does bring compassion. So that's the first thing, is to recognize, okay, well, that's the game afoot. That whether you realize it or not, whether you like it or not, you're probably going to be challenged by these prisons that are creating everything from the reason you are single or the reason you're in a marriage but can't leave and you're upset, to the fact that your body is starting to fail you, whatever it is. The litany of human problems are the extension of the fact that you look through a lens of constraint. So that's the first thing to recognize. So for me, I am not, I'm not myself in a position where, as far as I know, I'm able to walk on water and I'm some sort of enlightened being who doesn't have to deal with the human disposition. Have I transcended and reconciled the majority of these constraints that I help others find? Absolutely. Does that mean that I have an inordinate amount of freedom and way more peace than most people? I would assert yes. And this is why people find my presence to be joyous. They enjoy my humor. They just see somebody who, for whatever reasons, has a great deal of presence and is truly vital. And these are all the byproducts of the fact that I've stepped out of these prisons that create suffering. So how do I maintain my peace? I stay humble. I realized that just of late, even at the beginning of the year, I was in a relationship that brought up some very deep, couple of very deep things that I was oblivious to, for which I'm grateful. Was discomforting to go through, but nonetheless, I'm super grateful to this beautiful woman that I fell in love with, to the degree that I went so deep with her that it brought up stuff about my mom, which I'd forgotten about because I was 7 when she died, right? So again, I'm
Right.
not going to begrudge myself that I stood frozen as she got really upset and angry, which I've never dealt with. I typically attracted people who are very copacetic and nice and kind, and that's lovely. And this seemed not so good, but actually it was helpful because it brought some stuff up. So I'm not, in my own world, I'm not free of my own evolution. I say we're masterpieces and works in progress at the same time, right? So for me, I just feel very blessed that I've gone through so much. I've articulated this whole system that came sort of downloaded through me of these 10 prisons and the way that humans behave. So it gives me an edge. So when I'm leading people through a mastermind, I can lead them because I've been there and I can see where they're still stuck. And I still remain, as I said, open to my own evolution. So that also gives me peace because even if I were to be quote unquote triggered by anything, I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as a beautiful opportunity to find more freedom.
Hmm.
So I live and practice what I preach. So whilst most people might run away from that, avoid it, or find relief in a substance from it, I get excited by the prospect of like, ooh, why am I not okay with this situation? And that's one of the ultimate default questions I ask myself. I say, can I be with this?
Hmm.
And when you ask that question, if you can't, that's okay, but there's something there. If you can be with it, someone's upset, someone leaves you, money's lost on the stock market, you get fired, somebody dies, whatever, all the things that we tend to be in resistance to. If you can be with it, then that's freedom. So that's how I find peace, is that whether it's something that upsets me or not, obviously if it's not, then I'm in peace. But even if it does, I find peace because it's an opportunity for myself to grow.
Beautiful. And I was going to ask before I concluded with this question was, how did you get here to be teaching this? Because I do know your past, and I imagine some people might know your story or not, but I'm just curious, how you kind of mentioned it was downloaded to you. So I imagine you sat in a lot of silence, and I think that's what
Mhm.
a lot of people don't do. They have an
Yes.
uncomfortableness being with themselves, and I think that is, in my personal opinion, that is a clue that you are not free.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, would you say that that is the most necessary step a lot of us need to do, is create the space to be silent with ourselves to see what comes up, or what would be the clearest path to access where you are not free?
For sure, just to live life. But to address the first part of your question of how I got here, yes, I did spend an inordinate amount of time by myself, just by virtue of the logistics of my life. I was an only child. My mom dies at 7. My dad went to work at 17, never came back. So, because he died. So, just life forced my hand in that regard, right? Where it was like, oh, you're by yourself. So that was one of my prisons, was that I'm alone. And so at a young age of 17, that's very scary. And so I became incredibly vigilant as a means of making it, surviving, because I didn't have anyone who had my back. I didn't have any inheritance. I didn't have anyone who was going to help me with the down payment. I didn't have
Mhm.
anyone to go to, like a parent who would unconditionally love me in the face of, a breakup or something that was hard. So I think much of the skills that I amassed over time was just by virtue of those formative years where I just became incredibly sensitive and observant of my environment at the time for the means of survival. Now that I realize there's nothing for me to survive, it allows me to still have those attributes and those skills, but from the perspective now of just fascination, curiosity, and ultimately freedom. So it doesn't affect me. So that's what allowed me to get to this place of realizing, wow. And I just, for whatever reason, my karma and the way that my mind is put together, that I'm able to see sort of the matrix of
Yeah.
this human existence and the O's and the ones that define human thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It all just became categorically clear to me. And I was able to just listen to somebody with complete love and compassion, whatever they're going through, without judgment, and see that they're human. But ultimately, there's two primordial emotions that drive human behavior, which is hurt and scared. And they both associate with time. So hurt is unresolved history, right? People have been hurt, past tense. And scared is about the propagation of those things, meaning that now the mind is imagining these things being repeated. And so those are the primordial emotions that I'm able to see in people. And when someone's hurt or scared, what they need, first of all, is just to be held, seen, and loved and heard. And that's the energy that I bring, which then makes them feel safe enough to start to reflect on these things. To go to the second part of your question, which is, yeah, you just got to live life, because as you quoted me beautifully, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're free or not free. So it doesn't really matter what you do. Wherever you go, people are like, oh, I'm going to move to India, or I'm going to go and live in Timbuktu, or whatever they're trying to run away from. I'm like, great. Well, yes, I made this joke once. Actually, I might have mentioned it in the workshop with you. I don't remember, but I years ago when I first started my career, and I was just 15, 20 people staggered into a yoga studio to listen to some dude talk about relationships or freedom or disease.
Oh yeah.
And back in the day, and this girl came up to me at the end, and I knew she was kind of flirting a little bit and whatever. I'm the guy on the stage, right? So it's easy to have that sort of attraction to the teacher. And she was saying, I'm going to go to India, like as a way of sort of, whatever,
This
trying
is
to
so
impress
funny.
me.
Sorry, I'm laughing already.
Yeah. And so because I'm a bit of a smart ass but I try to deliver my medicine with humor too, I said, well, good luck. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're going to be there. Right. So, wherever we go, there we are. Right. So I love the meme that says, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, so
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
just
that's
beautiful.
it's so true. Wherever we go, there we are, and we need to recognize. Then that's when it comes down to. It all comes down to what's going on in here in your mind, and
Yeah.
what story are you repeating over and over, and that's really what's limiting you. And so, all the stuff you are saying is so great and so powerful. And I believe this could transform somebody's life if they really
Hmm.
hear your words.
Yeah.
But I know most people will hear words over and over, and it will sound great. It will seem to land. That's awesome. And then they'll start to meditate on it, but they'll still start repeating the same pattern over and over. And we could hear these words so many times, but it never changes us. So what is the problem here, and what is the solution?
Great question. The problem, and I'd say more the characteristic. I don't really like to look at things as problems because, in the world of duality, wherever there's a problem, there's also an opportunity, right? So just to look at what is the mechanism at play is, as I said, it is the addictive nature of our misidentification with the persona that we think we are, right? It is so slippery and insidious that people will fight for it. If you look at religions and the amount of bloodshed and millions of lives that have been lost in the name of religion, right? Now, what's really going on then? The mechanisms that are at play is somebody believes something and somebody else believes something else. That's really, if you break it down to its most fundamental components, I believe in this case one particular type of God or deity, and you believe in another one. And I feel that you believing in something else is a threat to my belief, and therefore we're in conflict, right? That, if you really understand that is the mechanism that is at play on a macro or micro level, whether a wife and a husband are fighting over something. It's actually very childish, right? And I don't say that as a judgment, but really as an observation that, there's a line in, I think it's the second or third Matrix, where Morpheus, and again, I'm appealing to the fact that most people have seen these movies, but the Zion, which is the home of all the free souls, where people have stepped out of the Matrix, is under attack from the machines, right? This sort of allegory on very much the life we live, right? The spirit versus the ego, right? The ego being the machines that are trying to kill us, which has been very much at play in the last 3 or 4 years. But that's a whole different topic of conversation. So anyway, the machines are attacking Zion, and as a result, the head of defense has asked all of the captains of all of the ships to come back so they can help defend. Morpheus, in this particular scene, has left his ship out in the Matrix because it's the way that he can communicate with this character called the Oracle, who is going to foresee the fate of mankind and Zion. And the reason being because he can communicate with her to see if Keanu Reeves' character, Neo, is in fact the one and he's going to save the universe and Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. So when he comes back, the head of defense says, damn it, Morpheus, the instructions were for everyone to bring their ship back. You know, we can defend our home base, Zion. And he explains, well, it's because I need to communicate the Oracle so we can see if Neo is the one. And the head of defense says, damn it, Morpheus, not everyone believes what you believe. And his response is so powerful. He says, my beliefs do not require them to. Right? So when you get that, his beliefs are so categoric for him that he doesn't mind what other people believe. So when you live in a world where you're so categorically clear about who you are, then it doesn't matter what other people think about you. And again, as I say, when people get upset by what other people say, you can only be upset by what other people say if you already believe them. Meaning, it's not what they said so much as the fact that somewhere in your psyche, you have the same narrative of inadequacy and judgment that they're pointing out, right? So that's also very powerful for people to go, wow, if I could recognize that the thing that's upsetting me is not what someone said, but rather that they revealed the same energy that I already have as a narrative about myself, then actually it's not a judgment or a criticism I'm hearing so much as an opportunity to reveal where I'm already berating myself, for which reason I could actually be thankful to that person because I don't want to be living in a prison of my own self-criticism, which is creating my suffering. So that's why it's hard, is because it's insidious. And for most people, it's all they know, right? They have learned from a very young age, usually 2, 3, 4, to start to live in a prison that is based in some sort of agreement. The primordial wound that we make as humans when we're very young is based in self-abandonment. And when people really get that, what that means is, unbeknownst to a child, it's unconscious, and again, for which reason there's no fault, but we make an undeclared agreement with our care providers, usually our parents, that we will become who we think you want us to be if you keep loving me, providing shelter and food. So basically, I will trade my own liberty, my sovereignty, and my freedom in order to stay safe, because, as I said, the primordial imperative is to survive. And when people can look back at their formative years and go, wow, I really did become the good girl, the good boy, the A-list, academic, the great athlete, because I wanted to be loved and accepted by my parents. No one would begrudge a human that choice, but that became the foundation upon which we then denied ourselves our true essence, because we thought we had to become someone to fit in, which is, it's a primal driver for all humans to feel a sense of belonging. But in the process, we lose the most important form of belonging, which is that with ourselves.
So true. And I think that's the thing, is everything you share, like wrapped in a bow, is about returning home to yourself and stop rejecting who you are and becoming something you're not, based on your perception of how you see yourself being and the lies you're telling yourself. Yeah. So good. This is all so powerful, and I could go on all day to talk to you, because I think this stuff is, and what you talk about is really, some people might think by certain things you say is somewhat harsh and convicting, but yet you're just revealing truth. Yes. And it could be hard to hear because, again, it's revealing in us the story we already have about ourselves. You're just turning the mirror on us, basically.
Yeah, and with love and compassion, because that's what I said. There's no need to feel guilt or shame. Everybody does it. Everyone has their feelings of inadequacy. It's not wrong. It's not bad, but it is incredibly painful and suffering. It creates suffering. So that's what I'm a stand for. I'm a stand for people's freedom. It might seem like at times it's tough love, but it's love nonetheless, right? So it's that there's nothing wrong with the fact that someone still smokes, or that they still drink too much, or that they don't get along with their spouse, or they hate their parents. I get it. I understand. And if I lived your life, I would have the same rationale, right? Because you really start to see that people do behave completely commensurate with their view. So if that's the view somebody has, then their behaviors make sense to them.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that we condone the behaviors, but we can understand that it's based on the view, and you can change your view. And your view, as I said, is just a way of reinforcing the ego's justification for its own limitations. That's not a battle worth fighting, as far as I'm concerned. Oh, congratulations. Wow, you get to be right about your own sense of insecurity. That's really
Right.
inspiring. No,
Right.
I'm a stand for people's fucking extraordinary nature and for them to be free, to recognize their true nature is love, their value is inherent, it never changes, and that their birthright is to be fully vital and alive. I don't think that's a bad thing to be a stand for.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think it's so great. I think also this work and everything we're talking about today, as you mentioned, it gives you compassion and empathy for others too,
Yes.
not only for yourself, but others. And I think that's so true. It's like, a person's behavior could be wrong. It was, what they did, abuse or whatnot, wasn't right. But
Yeah.
I could understand or have compassion where they came from and what led them to do that per se.
Exactly.
It,
As I often say, everyone's doing the best they can with the limits of within the limits of their current awareness.
yeah.
That does not condone behavior. And I'll be the first to tell if I'm working with a couple or I'm working with someone who's in an abusive relationship that yes, their mechanics of the way they view themselves as worthless, not lovable, not safe may well have attracted that type of person. So that's where they can be responsible. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean stay in that dangerous situation, right? But then let's get out of what is currently an abusive relationship in this case. But then let's also deal with the real abuse, which is the way you view yourself, so that the next person you attract is not in keeping with the view of your own worthlessness, but rather is a reflection of your own sense of self love and respect.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, I would love for people to learn more from you because only an hour we could only go so far and so
Yeah.
deep. So I want people to go deeper with you. So can you mention you have a mastermind that is truly powerful, and then also you have something called the Freedom Platform that people could join for a low monthly fee as well. Can you just briefly
Yeah.
explain that?
Sure. So my mastermind is sort of my biggest offering. It's a 3-month container, the most powerful journey. I think it's something that, of course, I'm biased, but every human being should ultimately do because in the mornings, I teach the theory. So you start to actually understand why people do what they do, including yourself and your loved ones. And then in the afternoon, I coach people. And it's just so inspiring to witness someone go from this place of constraint and suffering into freedom and vitality and possibility. And everybody vicariously gets the work, even if I work with them or not, because we all have similar stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we do that every 2 weeks. It's 7 modules. It's about 30 hours of content, an incredible community. That's arguably my most favorite thing to do on the planet because you just have tears and laughter and everybody just falls in love as they break free from their constraints. And then Freedom, the membership, is something I created with nearly all of my content. There's some things missing, but it's, all my workshops on anxiety, on depression, on relationships, on health, on creating your future. I have my sort of my flagship program, Free Your Mind, which is 30 hours, 30 videos and worksheets where I work with people. I explain the mechanics of the ego. That's all in there. I do monthly Q&As from the community. I have a wisdom library of 50 clips
So
that you
much.
can go through to look at anything. And so it's basically my version of a very conscious Netflix to help you awaken and break
Amazing.
free. And it's just $29 a month. So I wanted to make sure everyone could access it.
So good. Well, as you know, everything will be in the show notes. And of course, where you can find Peter Crone. He is everywhere on social media, YouTube, and whatnot. Be sure to check out this video on YouTube as well. And be sure to subscribe and follow along. And especially, like I said, follow Peter because there's a wealth of wisdom that he drops very often that we just need more of that in our life to remind us where we are not free and how to really step into freedom, peace, and vitality. I love it all. So,
Yeah,
Peter, I want to ask you, even though you've dropped so much wisdom, I got to ask you my final question. So,
sure.
if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you learned along your journey, and you feel you just need to shout out this piece of wisdom to the world, what would it be and why?
It's a great question. I think, somebody once asked me if you had a wish that you could grant all of humanity, what would it be? And I remember saying at the time it would be self-love, or sorry, self-respect.
Mm.
But I would say that's sort of a bedfellow with self-love. So I'd say that. I'd say the opportunity, and equally the challenge that it is to be human is to discover what it means to truly love oneself, right? And that doesn't mean scented candles and a bath and a spa, that's all great. But it means actually to learn to love the part of you that doesn't feel lovable.
So good. Yes, exactly. I think that's the thing. And I love how you say the part of you,
Yes.
because there's parts of us that we reject. We don't usually reject our whole self.
No.
There's parts. So that's beautiful. Oh my gosh, this conversation has been truly wonderful. I so appreciate you giving me the time to sit with you and share this with my audience and your audience as well, and the world, because we need more of this. We need more of Peter Crone in our life. Speak truth to us. So I just thank you for all the work you do, and your heart. I really see you. I see your vulnerability. I see you as, just like you said, just representing what love and compassion and empathy is, and really acknowledging people for where they're at and meeting them there so that they can expand into their highest self. So I just thank you for your work. Appreciate you.
Thank you for the kind words. That means a lot. Sometimes I'm very humbled by the number of people that write, and certainly, where I get stopped so often by people who say, you changed my life. And it's still, for a kid who was orphaned from a very small town or village in Southeast England, it's still very humbling. So I do the best I can to stay in that space whilst also recognizing um, the gift that I have to help people step out of suffering. And so it's nice to see that you see that in me, and that I'm still very human, and I'm really just a boy who likes to have fun and wants more people to play with.
So good. That's so awesome. I love it. Well, thank you again. Appreciate you.
Thank you.